Movement pattern change, Wilson signaled from his security position. Repository response contracting, not expanding. Carlos paused mid-step, processing this unexpected development. For the past hour, they had navigated through increasingly active defensive measures, terrain reconfiguration, detection fields, consciousness-affecting zones designed to extract neural patterns. The repository's response had been steadily expanding outward from the construction site where their monitoring package had been successfully deployed. But now, he's right, Carlos confirmed, after studying the energy patterns flowing through the transformed landscape ahead. The response is concentrating elsewhere, creating a focal point rather than a search perimeter. Graves signaled a brief halt, the team taking defensive positions while they assessed this new development. 3 kilometers remained between their current location and the extraction vessel, terrain that had seemed likely to become increasingly hostile as they approached. Now the tactical situation had inexplicably shifted in their favor. They found another team, Bell suggested, her voice barely audible, concentrating resources on confirmed targets rather than potential intrusions. Possible, Graves acknowledged, or strategic redistribution to create false security impression. Maintain maximum vigilance. The team resumed movement along the ridge formation, their pace carefully calibrated to balance speed against detection risk. Carlos continued monitoring the energy patterns throughout the transformed landscape, trying to interpret the repository's unexpected response contraction. "Something's not right," he whispered to Bell as they navigated a particularly exposed section. "The repository doesn't make tactical errors. It thinks thousands of moves ahead. This feels deliberate." Bell nodded slight agreement, her attention divided between monitoring team neural protection levels and maintaining situational awareness. Luring us into complacency or genuinely distracted by higher priority threats? Before Carlos could respond, Wilson signaled from his forward position, not danger, but something that required attention. The team adjusted their route to converge on his location, maintaining their disciplined approach despite the apparent reduction in immediate threat. "Fisher," Wilson called quietly when Carlos reached him. "Assessment required." Carlos followed the Marine's gesture toward a formation approximately 200 meters from their position. At first glance, it appeared similar to the countless transformed structures they had passed throughout their journey. Flowing architectural configurations that defied conventional engineering principles, existence partially phased between dimensional states. But as he studied it more carefully, Carlos realized this structure was different. Unlike the organic integration characterizing most of the repository's transformed architecture, this formation stood in stark contrast to its surroundings. Its geometric precision, its mathematical regularity, its perfect spatial alignment, all suggested purpose beyond the general transformation reshaping the planet's surface. "That's not part of the standard transformation pattern," Carlos observed, something nagging at the edges of his memory. "It's too deliberate." "Recent construction," Wilson agreed. "Material composition inconsistent with surrounding transformation parameters, specialized function indicated." Carlos continued studying the structure, trying to place why it seemed vaguely familiar despite its alien configuration. Something about the geometric proportions, the specific mathematical relationships between its components. Then recognition hit like a physical blow. "I've seen this before," he said, voice tight with sudden urgency. "During my time as a bridge, not physically constructed but in the repository's conceptual architecture. A design pattern within its planning matrices." Graves joined them, taking in Carlos' changed demeanor with tactical assessment. "Function. It's a dimensional tether," Carlos explained, memories from his bridge connection surfacing with unexpected clarity. "A specialized structure that establishes fixed reference points between conventional reality and whatever states the repository exists in beyond our perceptual framework." Bell's expression showed immediate understanding of the implications. "An anchor point, like the orbital network they established beyond our blockade, but more fundamental." "Yes," Carlos confirmed, but different from the dimensional anchors we've observed. Those extend the repository's presence into conventional space. This, he gestured toward the precisely constructed formation, this works in the opposite direction. It establishes stable connection points into the dimensional states the repository draws from. The Argonauts process this information with their characteristic efficiency, tactical implications immediately apparent. Graves studied the structure through specialized optics, assessing defensive capabilities and potential approach vectors. Strategic significance? He asked simply. Carlos considered the question carefully, reaching back through memories of his time interfacing with repository systems. Critical infrastructure, he concluded. The repository exists across multiple dimensional interfaces simultaneously. It needs stable reference points to maintain coherent presence in conventional reality while operating beyond it. A weakness, Wilson observed. The tactical interpretation immediate. Potentially, Carlos agreed. If disrupted, it might temporarily destabilize the repository's ability to operate across dimensional boundaries, create vulnerability in its otherwise seamless integration between states. Graves remained silent for a long moment, his attention divided between the dimensional tether and the surrounding landscape. Carlos could almost see the tactical calculations processing behind the sergeant's impassive expression. Risk assessment, strategic advantage evaluation, mission parameter considerations. Finally, Graves activated a secure communication device, one of the few technological concessions the Argonauts permitted, designed specifically to avoid propository detection through mechanical rather than digital transmission methods. Incoming transmission, he announced quietly after a brief exchange. Echo team compromised, extraction attempt ongoing, significant repository response focused on their position. The Argonauts exchanged glances that communicated volumes without words, the specialized empathy of men who understood exactly what a compromised team faced against repository forces. Location? Wilson asked simply. Graves indicated a direction approximately 2 kilometers northwest of their position. Extraction route compromised. Repository forces concentrating on containment. Minimal support options available from existing deployment. Carlos processed this grim update. Another insertion team, Echo, had been detected and was now fighting for survival against concentrated repository response. Their own team had benefited from this distraction, allowing their successful extraction progress despite having deployed their monitoring package at a high-value target. "Can we assist?" Bell asked, the question directed at both Graves and Carlos. Direct intervention would compromise our extraction probability with minimal impact on Echo Team survival parameters. Graves replied with the clinical precision of a tactical commander who had made such calculations throughout his military career. Then he turned to Carlos, his expression showing rare uncertainty. However alternative intervention options may exist, the dimensional tether, if disrupted, would it affect repository operational capabilities throughout the surrounding territory? Carlos considered the question carefully, reaching back through his bridge memories to understand the tether's function within the consciousness harvester's architecture. Yes, he concluded after brief analysis, the tether channels energy from whatever exists beyond dimensional interfaces. It's a fundamental power source for local operations. Disrupting it would temporarily degrade all repository systems within its operational radius, including those currently focused on Echo Team's position, Graves pressed. Almost certainly, Carlos confirmed. The repository would need to redistribute resources to contain whatever disruption we caused, while simultaneously maintaining its pursuit operation. It would create a significant tactical diversion. Graves made no obvious signal that Carlos could discern, yet the Argonauts shifted position with synchronized purpose, adapting their formation to this new objective without verbal communication. The marine-carrying demolition equipment, Davis Carlos had learned during their journey, moved forward, already assessing placement points for maximum effect. "Wait," Carlos cautioned, "this wasn't part of our mission parameters. We don't know exactly what disrupting a dimensional tether might do to the surrounding environment. The repository's dimensional interfaces are far more complex than our understanding of conventional physics." Tactical opportunity assessment indicates acceptable risk profile, Graves replied after brief consideration. Primary mission objective achieved. Secondary target of strategic value identified. Operational parameters permit discretionary engagement. He paused, eyes focusing on something in the distance that only he could see. Additionally, diversion would significantly increase Echo Team extraction probability. Carlos recognized the multiple calculations at work. The Argonauts had been granted authority to make field decisions regarding targets of opportunity, provided their primary mission objectives had been secured. The monitoring package had been successfully deployed and was transmitting data. The dimensional tether represented both an unexpected strategic target and a potential lifeline for another team facing repository containment. Still, he hesitated. The repository's dimensional interfaces aren't just technological systems. They're fundamental to how it exists across multiple states simultaneously. Disrupting that could have unpredictable consequences, more unpredictable than allowing a consciousness harvester to maintain optimal operational capability while capturing another insertion team, Bell asked quietly, her question cutting directly to the heart of the matter. Carlos had no answer for that. The repository had been executing its plans for 77 million years, harvesting consciousness throughout the galaxy to construct something beyond human comprehension. Any opportunity to disrupt those operations, even temporarily, represented a potential advantage humanity couldn't afford to ignore. How would we even affect it? He asked finally. That structure exists partially outside conventional reality. Standard demolition might not have any meaningful impact on its dimensional interface functions. Davis had been studying the formation with professional assessment. Resonance pattern analysis indicates vulnerability nodes at junction points where conventional material interfaces with phase-shifted components. Targeted disruption at those nodes would cascade through the entire structure. Specially designed for exactly this type of target, Wilson added. Developed based on analysis of Repository 10 architecture fragments, limited field testing but theoretically sound engineering principles. Carlos looked to Bell, who offered a slight shrug. If there's a genuine chance to impair the repository's capabilities while helping another team escape, the unfinished thought hung between them, a reflection of humanity's desperate situation against an entity that existed partially beyond conventional reality. Any advantage, any disruption, any vulnerability might prove critical in the broader conflict. All right, Carlos conceded, but we need to understand what we're potentially dealing with. That structure creates stable reference points between conventional reality and whatever dimensional states the repository draws from. If we disrupt those reference points, the local environment might experience temporary phase instability. Meaning? Graves prompted. Meaning the repository's systems will struggle to maintain operational coherence until it reestablishes dimensional stability, Carlos explained. It draws power from whatever exists beyond those interfaces. Cut that connection even temporarily and its local operations degrade significantly. The Argonauts exchanged glances that communicated volumes without words, the specialized threat assessment of men who had faced extraordinary dangers throughout their military careers. After brief, silent communication, their decision was clear. Acceptable operational hazard, Graves concluded. Team will execute targeted structural disruption of the dimensional tether. Fisher provides targeting guidance, Bell maintains neural protection monitoring. Extraction priority remains unchanged following objective completion. He activated the secure communication device once more. Echo Team, Argonaut Actual, diversionary operation commencing in approximately 10 minutes at coordinates 4782-103. Suggest immediate extraction preparation to exploit resulting window. The response came as barely audible static, interpreted by Graves with grim satisfaction. Echo acknowledges. 3 surviving members attempting extraction. Repository containment operations in final phase. The methodical planning proceeded with the Argonauts' characteristic efficiency. Approach vectors identified, security positions established, demolition strategy developed. Davis prepared specialized charges designed specifically for partially phased structures, their composition incorporating elements salvaged from previous propository encounters. Targeting requires precise placement, Davis explained as he configured the charges. Junction points where conventional reality interfaces with phase-shifted components. Maximum disruption effect with minimal material footprint. Carlos studied the dimensional tether with renewed focus, identifying the critical nodes where reality itself seemed to fold between states. There, he indicated specific junctions within the structure. Those connection points anchor the conventional components to whatever exists beyond our perceptual framework. Disrupting them should compromise the entire interface stability. Davis nodded, understanding, his hands making final adjustments to the specialized charges. 3-point placement for cascade effect. Sequential detonation rather than simultaneous. Creates resonance pattern that propagates through dimensional interfaces rather than just conventional material. Time requirement? Graves asked. 7 minutes for approach and placement. Davis assessed. 3-minute delayed detonation sequence to allow team withdrawal to safe distance. Graves considered this against their extraction timeline, the repository's current response pattern, and Echo Team's increasingly desperate situation. The dimensional tether sat approximately 500 meters off their optimal route to the extraction vessel, not a significant detour but potentially critical minutes added to their journey. Proceed, he decided. Williams established security perimeter. Wilson, forward observation. Davis and Fisher approach for charge placement. Bell and remaining team maintain fallback position. 3-minute charge delay following placement confirmation. The plan unfolded with practiced precision, each Argonaut moving to their assigned position with synchronized efficiency that required no verbal communication. Carlos found himself accompanying Davis toward the dimensional tether, their approach following natural terrain features that provided maximum concealment against repository monitoring systems. Still no active response patterns, Carlos noted as they drew closer to the structure. The repository's defensive measures remain concentrated elsewhere. Opportunity created by Echo Team's situation, Davis suggested quietly. Their detection provides our advantage window. The thought that another team was fighting for survival, perhaps already partially processed, while they exploited the resulting tactical opportunity, settled heavily on Carlos. Yet he recognized the military calculus at work. Maximum mission effectiveness from distributed operations, with the Argonauts now attempting to create a diversion that might offer Echo Team their only remaining chance. They reached the dimensional tether's perimeter after several minutes of careful approach. Up close, the structure's alien nature became even more apparent. Components that seemed to exist in multiple states simultaneously, geometric relationships that defied conventional mathematical principles. Energy patterns flowing through configurations that hurt the human mind to contemplate directly. Junction points identified, Carlos whispered, indicating the specific nodes where reality itself seemed to fold between dimensional states, 3 primary anchors maintaining stability across interface boundaries. Davis nodded, already removing the specialized charges from his equipment harness. The devices looked deceptively simple. Small cylinders containing what appeared to be standard explosive compounds, but Carlos recognized more exotic components incorporated into their design, materials salvaged from previous propository encounters, configured to affect structures that existed partially beyond conventional reality. First placement, Davis murmured, securing a charge at the junction point Carlos had identified. His movements were precise and economical, the result of countless similar operations throughout his military career. Resonance pattern configured for phase shift disruption, timer set for remote synchronization. They moved to the second junction point, Davis repeating the placement process with the same methodical efficiency. Carlos maintained vigilant observation of propository energy patterns throughout the surrounding environment, watching for any sign that their presence had been detected. Still concentrated elsewhere, he confirmed as they approached the final junction point. No indication of adaptive response to our position. 2 minutes to placement completion, Davis replied, already preparing the final charge. As the Marine secured the specialized device at the third junction point, Carlos continued studying the dimensional tether with growing fascination. Despite their precarious tactical situation, the structure represented something fundamental about how the repository existed across multiple states simultaneously, a physical manifestation of principles that transcended conventional understanding of reality itself. "Placement complete," Davis announced quietly. "Initiating synchronization sequence. 3-minute delay commencing on my mark." Mark. The charge's timers synchronized with silent electronic precision, beginning their countdown toward detonation. Davis and Carlos immediately began their withdrawal, moving back toward the fallback position where Bell and the remainder of the team awaited them. "Charges placed," Davis reported as they rejoined the group. "Detonation in 2 minutes 40 seconds. Graves signaled immediate withdrawal to safe distance, the team moving with renewed urgency away from the dimensional tether. Their route followed the natural ridge formation, providing both cover and stable terrain as they established maximum separation before detonation. 1 minute, Davis updated as they reached a position Graves deemed sufficiently removed from the target. The team took defensive positions, preparing for whatever might follow the charge's detonation. Carlos found himself beside Bell, both watching the dimensional tether in the distance with mixture of scientific curiosity and tactical concern. "Any predictions on what will happen when those charges detonate?" she asked quietly. "None that would qualify as scientifically sound," Carlos admitted. "The repository's dimensional interfaces operate according to principles beyond our current understanding of physics. Disrupting a structural anchor point between reality states is unprecedented." 30 seconds, Davis announced, monitoring the synchronized timer on a specialized mechanical device. No digital components, no electronic signals that repository systems might detect or interfere with. The team's tension was palpable. Despite their professional discipline, they had successfully deployed their monitoring package at the dimensional anchor construction site. Now they were attempting something far more directly interventionist, disrupting fundamental infrastructure of the consciousness harvester's operations. 10 seconds, prepare for potential system response. Carlos found himself holding his breath as the final seconds counted down. Whatever happened next would provide critical intelligence about repository vulnerabilities, whether its dimensional interface structures could indeed be compromised by human intervention, however temporarily. 3, 2, 1, mark. The detonation wasn't what Carlos expected. No conventional explosion with pressure wave and debris, no visible destruction of physical components. Instead, the dimensional tether seemed to fold upon itself, reality rippling outward from the 3 junction points where Davis had placed his specialized charges. The structure didn't shatter or collapse, but rather phased out of conventional existence, its components separating across dimensional boundaries rather than physically disintegrating. Then the real effects began. From the point where the dimensional tether had stood, the repository's transformed landscape began to exhibit immediate signs of system-wide degradation. Energy patterns that had flowed with mathematical precision now fluctuated erratically. Structures that had existed partially outside conventional reality now phased unpredictably between states. Monitoring systems that had maintained comprehensive coverage now displayed visible gaps and inconsistencies in their detection fields. "It's working," Carlos breathed, watching the cascading effects spread through the surrounding repository architecture. The dimensional tether was channeling energy from whatever exists beyond those interfaces. Without it, the repository can't maintain operational coherence throughout the sector. The effects continued expanding outward, though their intensity diminished with distance from the disruption point. Where the dimensional tether had stood, the repository's systems struggled to compensate for the sudden loss of their primary energy source. "Secondary effects manifesting," Wilson noted from his observation position. "Repository energy patterns showing significant disruption throughout the sector, monitoring systems failing, defensive measures deactivating." Carlos studied the unfolding effects with stunned appreciation for what they had accomplished. The dimensional tether hadn't just been infrastructure. It had been a critical anchor point maintaining the repository's ability to operate seamlessly across multiple states of existence simultaneously. Without it, the consciousness harvester was experiencing fundamental operational disruption throughout the surrounding territory. Echo Team Argonaut Actual, Graves transmitted through the secure communication device. Diversionary operation successful, extraction window approximately 12 minutes based on observed repository degradation patterns. Confirm status. The response came clearer this time, a human voice taut with controlled urgency. Argonaut Actual, Echo confirms, repository containment operations disrupted. Attempting extraction along secondary route, 3 members mobile, 2 minutes to extraction vessel. Your intervention is appreciated. Graves allowed himself a brief nod of satisfaction before returning to their primary mission concerns. We need to move, he ordered, already signaling the team to resume their extraction route. Exploitation window approximately 12 minutes before repository implements recovery protocols, maximum speed while maintaining disciplined formation. The Argonauts immediately responded, reforming their movement pattern with the same synchronized efficiency that characterized everything they did. But now they moved with significantly greater speed, no longer hampered by the need to navigate around active monitoring systems or detection fields. The repository is drawing power from other dimensions, Carlos realized as they made rapid progress toward their extraction vessel. That tether wasn't just an interface point. It was channeling energy from whatever exists beyond conventional reality. Without it, the local systems are running on internal reserves only. Explaining the comprehensive effect range, Bell agreed, keeping pace despite the accelerated movement. Not just localized disruption, but sector-wide system degradation. They covered ground with unprecedented speed, the repository's transformed landscape no longer actively reconfiguring to impede their progress. Monitoring systems that would have detected their presence remained offline. Detection fields that would have extracted their consciousness patterns deactivated. Defensive measures that would have contained their movement disabled. We just discovered a critical vulnerability, Carlos said to Bell as they navigated a particularly complex terrain section. If the repository relies on dimensional energy transfer through specific anchor points, targeting those structures could temporarily neutralize its operational capabilities across entire sectors. Assuming we could identify and reach them, Bell pointed out pragmatically. This was a target of opportunity in territory already compromised by multiple insertion teams. Carlos nodded agreement while maintaining focus on their extraction route. The repository was attempting to compensate for the disruption, but without its primary energy source, recovery proceeded at significantly reduced efficiency. Throughout the surrounding territory, systems struggled to maintain operational coherence, creating an unprecedented window of opportunity for both their team and Echo's extraction attempt. 2 kilometers to extraction vessel, Graves updated as they maintained their accelerated pace along the ridge formation. Estimated arrival in 26 minutes at current speed. The extraction timeline had improved dramatically with the repository systems temporarily disabled throughout the sector. What had appeared to be an increasingly desperate journey through hostile territory had become a tactical exploitation of unprecedented vulnerability, all because they had identified and neutralized a dimensional tether whose function Carlos had recognized from his time as a bridge. "Something's coming," Wilson reported suddenly from his forward position, dropping to a defensive posture with practiced efficiency. Carlos followed the Marine's indication and immediately spotted the anomaly. A disturbance in the transformed landscape ahead, not repository architecture but something new emerging from the dimensional disruption they had caused. Not the chaotic breakdown he had feared, but something with apparent purpose. Ethereal formations precipitating directly from the disturbed area around the tether's former location. That's not repository recovery, Carlos realized with growing concern. That's something else entirely, something from the other side of the interface. Graves immediately signaled increased urgency, the team accelerating to maximum sustainable speed while maintaining essential formation discipline. Whatever was emerging from the dimensional interface disruption, tactical assessment clearly indicated it represented potential threat beyond their current operation. Echo Team, Argonaut Actual, Graves transmitted through the secure communication device. Be advised, unknown manifestation occurring in disruption zone. Accelerate extraction immediately. Repeat, unknown dimensional effects spreading from target location. The response came with professional clarity despite obvious urgency. Argonaut Actual, Echo confirms, boarding extraction vessel now. Launch in approximately 90 seconds. Good news amid growing concern. Echo Team had reached their extraction vessel and would soon be departing, their escape made possible by the disruption Carlos and the Argonauts had created by targeting the dimensional tether. "We need to move faster," Carlos urged, sudden understanding crystallizing in his mind. The dimensional tether wasn't just channeling energy, it was maintaining separation between reality states. Without it, whatever exists on the other side of the interface can potentially manifest into conventional space. Graves needed no further explanation, signaling maximum speed regardless of detection risk. The team abandoned remaining stealth protocols, focusing entirely on rapid extraction before whatever was emerging from the dimensional disruption could fully manifest. They had covered another kilometer, the extraction vessel now potentially within reach, when they received unexpected confirmation of their success. Argonaut Actual, Echo Actual, came a transmission through the secure communication device. Extraction successful. Vessel departed surface, blockade approach initiated. 3 team members recovered. Your intervention directly enabled extraction. Operational debt acknowledged. Despite the growing threat from the dimensional disruption, Graves allowed himself a brief expression of satisfaction, a slight nod that conveyed volumes to those who knew how to read the stoic Marine's minimal emotional displays. The Argonauts had not only completed their primary mission, but had successfully created a diversion that allowed another team to escape what would otherwise have been certain processing by repository forces. "Good hunting, Echo Actual," Graves replied. "Safe return. Argonaut continuing extraction operations." They had covered perhaps 2 kilometers from the dimensional tether's former location, the extraction vessel now potentially within reach, when Carlos noticed the ethereal formations had stabilized their expansion, not continuing to spread throughout the sector, but establishing a perimeter around the disruption zone, almost as if containing themselves rather than aggressively manifesting. "Repository is responding," he noted, observing energy patterns beginning to flow with renewed coherence through the transformed landscape. It's implementing containment protocols around the disruption, re-establishing interface stability using alternative systems. "A kilometer to extraction vessel," Wilson reported, maintaining his security position at the formation's edge. "Repository recovery accelerating, but extraction window remains viable." The team continued their rapid progress toward the extraction point, the disruption they had caused still providing significant advantage despite the consciousness harvester's recovery efforts. What might have been an increasingly desperate journey through hostile territory remained a tactical exploitation of identified vulnerability. "Extraction vessel visual confirmation," Wilson updated as they crested a rise in the terrain. 800 meters. No apparent compromise. Through gaps in the transformed landscape ahead, Carlos could indeed see their insertion craft waiting at the designated extraction point. The vessel showed no signs of detection or interference. The repository's defensive systems throughout the sector remained compromised by the dimensional disruption. "Echo Team confirms orbital blockade transit," Graves reported after receiving another transmission. "Extraction successful. Return to Galileo Station initiated. A small victory amid the larger conflict. 3 team members recovered who would otherwise have been processed by repository forces. Their experience, their knowledge, their consciousness patterns preserved, rather than harvested and integrated into the transcendent entity's evolution." 500 meters, Graves updated, as they maintain maximum speed toward the extraction vessel. "Prepare for immediate departure upon boarding. Full emergency protocols." The team acknowledged with disciplined focus, each member maintaining their assigned position despite the urgent circumstance. The Argonauts' training held even as reality itself destabilized around them, a testament to their extraordinary preparation for operations beyond conventional parameters. Carlos risked a glance backward as they approached the final stretch to the extraction vessel. The repository's recovery efforts were clearly visible. Energy patterns re-establishing coherence, monitoring systems gradually reactivating, defensive measures coming back online as alternative power sources were identified and integrated. The window of opportunity they had created by targeting the dimensional tether was closing, but not before they could exploit it for successful extraction. Boarding Protocol Alpha, Graves ordered as they reached the vessel, the team immediately executing their practiced extraction formation. Minimum equipment retention, maximum departure speed. The Argonauts moved with synchronized efficiency, boarding the vessel according to their predetermined sequence. Carlos and Bell followed, abandoning non-essential equipment to minimize transition time between surface operations and departure preparation. "Launch in 30 seconds, announced the lead pilot, his focus absolute on the manual control interfaces before him. "Mechanical separation from surface on my mark." Carlos secured himself into a jump seat, Bell beside him completing the same rapid procedure. Through the vessel's viewport, they could see the repository's recovery continuing, systems gradually re-establishing operational coherence as the consciousness harvester implemented alternative energy sources to compensate for the dimensional tether's destruction. The repository was containing something, Carlos said quietly to Bell, processing what they had witnessed. The dimensional tether wasn't just channeling energy, it was maintaining separation between reality states while allowing controlled transfer. When we disrupted it, whatever exists beyond that interface started manifesting directly. And the repository immediately contained it, Bell noted. Priority over pursuing us or even maintaining standard operations. That suggests whatever exists on the other side of that interface might be more dangerous than we realized. "Launch sequence initiating," the pilot announced. Mechanical separation in 3, 2, 1, mark. The vessel lifted from Pository 11's transformed surface with the same chemical thrust that had characterized their insertion. No advanced propulsion systems, no neural-linked controls, just mechanical operation and human piloting skill. The acceleration pressed Carlos into his seat as they rapidly ascended from the surface. "Repository systems activating below," Wilson reported from a monitoring position. "Recovery protocols implementing throughout affected sector. Standard operations resuming with approximately 70% efficiency." Indeed, as they gained altitude, Carlos could see the consciousness harvester's systems continuing their recovery across the transformed landscape. Energy patterns flowing with renewed coherence. Transformed structures re-establishing stable configurations, monitoring systems reactivating despite the disruption to their primary energy source. "Mission assessment indicates comprehensive success," Graves stated with the clinical precision of a commander evaluating operational outcomes. "Primary objective achieved with monitoring package deployment. Secondary objective exceeded expectations with identification and neutralization of critical repository infrastructure. Additional objective achieved with successful diversion creation, enabling Echo Team extraction." The formal assessment couldn't capture the full significance of what they had accomplished, not just completing their assigned mission, but discovering a fundamental vulnerability in repository operations and saving 3 team members from certain processing. More importantly, they had revealed something about the consciousness harvester's true nature that no one had anticipated. Its relationship with whatever existed beyond dimensional interfaces. "Orbital approach in 17 minutes, the pilot announced as they established stable ascent trajectory. Blockade recognition protocols prepared for implementation upon reaching perimeter. The extraction was proceeding according to operational parameters, their vessel rising from Repository 11's atmosphere toward the orbital blockade that would allow their passage based on predetermined recognition codes. The mission had achieved its primary objective, deploying specialized monitoring equipment at the dimensional anchor construction site. It had also revealed critical intelligence about repository operations that no one had anticipated. "We succeeded beyond parameters," Carlos said quietly to Bell as Repository 11 receded below them. "Deployed the monitoring package successfully, discovered a critical vulnerability in the repository's dimensional energy infrastructure, saved Echo Team from processing, and revealed something fundamental about how the consciousness harvester actually operates." "Howard is going to have questions," Bell noted. Many questions." "I'm not sure we have answers," Carlos replied honestly. "Just more complexity than anyone anticipated." The Argonauts maintained their disciplined composure throughout the vessel's ascent, each focused on their assigned responsibilities despite having witnessed phenomena beyond conventional understanding. These men had developed operational methodology specifically for environments where standard tactical approaches failed. Their adaptation to extraordinary circumstances was built into their fundamental training. As Repository 11 grew smaller beneath them, Carlos found himself contemplating the multiplying implications of what they had discovered. The consciousness harvester wasn't the entity they had initially believed, not just a system harvesting minds throughout the galaxy to construct a transcendent entity, but something maintaining critical separation between reality states while exploiting energy from whatever existed beyond dimensional interfaces. "Orbital approach in 5 minutes," the pilot updated. "Blockade recognition protocols prepared for implementation." The vessel continued its ascent toward the quarantine perimeter, carrying them away from Repository 11's transformed surface, with both their primary mission objective accomplished and unexpected intelligence gathered about the consciousness harvester's true nature. Their operation had succeeded on multiple levels. Monitoring package deployed, dimensional tether neutralized, Echo Team extraction enabled. "We've been fighting what we thought was simply a consciousness harvester," Carlos observed to Bell as they approached orbital transition. "But it's something far more complex. A system channeling energy from other dimensional states while carefully controlling what can pass between interfaces." "The implications for our opposition strategy are significant," Bell agreed. "If dimensional tethers represent critical vulnerability points, targeting them systematically could potentially degrade repository operations across entire sectors. Assuming we can identify and reach them," Carlos cautioned. "This was a target of opportunity discovered during extraction. The repository will undoubtedly increase protection around similar structures now that we've demonstrated their vulnerability." The war for galactic consciousness had just revealed another layer of complexity, one that might offer humanity its first genuine tactical advantage against an entity that had been harvesting minds throughout the galaxy for millions of years. The dimensional tether's vulnerability represented a potential weakness in otherwise seamless operations, a strategic opportunity that Howard and Dell would undoubtedly exploit in planning future operations. An Echo Team would return to Galileo Station because the Argonauts had chosen to create a diversion rather than simply completing their own extraction. Human connection and mutual support prevailing against the isolation strategy the repository had attempted to impose through its targeted response. Small victories in an ongoing conflict, but perhaps more significant than tactical assessments might suggest, or at least it seemed like a small victory won by connection. The moment the Argonauts made it into orbit, they came under fire from Echo Team's transport. "Incoming!" the pilot shouted, executing an emergency evasive maneuver that sent everyone grabbing for handholds. The vessel lurched violently as concentrated energy fire sliced through the space they had occupied moments before. "What the hell?" Carlos gasped, straining against his restraints to glimpse the attacker through the viewport. Wilson was already at the tactical station, his practiced eye immediately identifying the threat. "Echo Team vessel confirmed. Weapons systems active. Attack pattern indicates deliberate targeting." "Impossible," Bell said, shock evident beneath her professional composure. "Echo confirmed successful extraction. We just received their transmission." Graves moved to the command console with the cold efficiency of a veteran commander suddenly thrust into combat. "Echo vessel, Argonaut actual, cease fire immediately, authentication code Helios 79. No response came except another barrage of weapons fire, narrowly avoided by their pilot's desperate maneuvering. The Echo vessel adjusted course with unnatural precision, positioning for another attack run with mechanical efficiency that no human pilot could match. "They're not responding to authentication protocols," Graves stated, his voice carrying the grim certainty of a man who had seen combat betrayals before. "Behavior indicates complete system compromise." Carlos watched in horror as the Echo vessel executed another attack pattern, its movements displaying none of the human inconsistency natural to piloting. "It's not Echo Team," he realized with sudden clarity. "The repository processed them. It's controlling their vessel through their extracted consciousness patterns." "Assessment confirmed," Wilson agreed from the tactical station. "Movement patterns consistent with propository control profiles observed during Operation Hammer. No human piloting signatures detectable." The implications hit with devastating force. Echo Team hadn't escaped at all. They had been processed, their consciousness patterns extracted, and their physical forms repurposed as vessels for repository control. Their transmission confirming successful extraction had been a deliberate deception, luring the Argonauts into a false sense of security until they reached orbital space. "Defensive options?" Graves demanded, his focus entirely on immediate survival. "Limited," the pilot replied, executing another desperate evasion as weapons fire tracked their movement. "Insertion vessel designed for stealth approach, not combat operations. Minimal countermeasures available." The Echo vessel adjusted course again, its unnatural precision allowing it to anticipate their evasive patterns with disturbing accuracy. The repository wasn't just controlling the vessel, it was applying extracted knowledge of military tactics and piloting techniques from the process team members. "They're hurting us," Wilson observed, tactical experience allowing him to recognize the pattern. "Forcing our movement toward the orbital blockade edge, where maneuver options decrease." Graves made an immediate decision, the kind battlefield commanders face countless times. Impossible choices with lives hanging in the balance. "Defensive weapons release authorized. Targeted engine disruption only. Attempt to disable without destruction if possible." The weapons officer, an Argonaut named Thompson who had maintained silent vigilance throughout the mission, immediately activated systems that Carlos hadn't realized the vessel possessed. Concealed ports opened along the hull, revealing modest but functional defense armaments. Another example of the Argonauts' philosophy of minimal but essential technology. "Targeting enemy propulsion systems," Thompson confirmed, his hands moving with practiced efficiency across mechanical control interfaces. "Firing solution established." "Execute," Graves ordered. The Argonaut vessel shuddered slightly as the weapons discharged, sending precisely targeted energy bursts toward the Echo transport's engine sections. Under normal circumstances, such limited armaments would have minimal effect against a military-grade vessel. But Thompson's aim proved devastatingly accurate, the bursts striking vulnerable junction points that standard defenses left exposed. The Echo vessel's movement faltered momentarily, but instead of withdrawing or adjusting tactics, it immediately shifted to a more aggressive approach, direct intercept course that could only indicate ramming intention. "Collision course detected," Wilson reported, his voice maintaining professional calm despite the dire implications. "Impact trajectory calculated for maximum damage profile. No evasion pattern will provide sufficient separation given relative velocities and positioning." Carlos watched in horror as the Echo vessel accelerated toward them, its engines damaged but still capable of generating catastrophic collision force. The repository controlling it had abandoned tactical subtlety for direct destruction, sacrificing the captured vessel to eliminate the Argonauts before they could return with their intelligence about the dimensional tether vulnerability. "All personnel brace for impact," Graves ordered, his voice carrying the weight of a commander who recognized when options had narrowed to mere survival preparation. "Emergency protocols Alpha, secure all critical equipment." Bell moved with practiced efficiency, securing medical supplies and ensuring crash positions would minimize injury potential. The other Argonauts similarly prepared for imminent collision, their disciplined response to crisis evident even in these desperate circumstances. 15 seconds to impact, Wilson updated, still seeking tactical alternatives despite the increasingly inevitable outcome. No viable evasion vectors identified. Carlos found himself staring at the approaching vessel, knowing it contained the processed remains of Echo Team humans, whose consciousness patterns had been extracted and integrated into the transcendent entity, their physical forms now repurposed as weapons against former comrades. The visceral demonstration of the repository's true nature and the fate awaiting anyone it successfully captured. 10 seconds. The distance between vessels closed with horrifying rapidity, the Echo transport growing larger in the viewports as collision became increasingly unavoidable. Despite their pilots' desperate maneuvering attempts, the repository-controlled vessel adjusted with inhuman precision, maintaining perfect intercept trajectory, regardless of evasion efforts. 5 seconds. Carlos braced himself, securing his restraints and preparing for impact that would likely cripple or destroy their vessel. Belle caught his eye briefly, her expression conveying volumes without words. Recognition of their shared circumstance, acknowledgement of whatever might follow, determination to face it together despite the grim probabilities. 3, 2, 1. The impact never came. Instead, a blinding flash of energy erupted from somewhere beyond their viewport, striking the Echo vessel with pinpoint precision microseconds before collision. The transport's forward section disintegrated instantly, momentum carrying the remaining fragments past their position with barely meters to spare. "What the hell was that?" the pilot demanded, regaining control of their suddenly undamaged vessel. "Blockade vessel weapon signature detected," Wilson reported after brief analysis. "Vigilant tactical systems, direct intervention authorized at command level." Graves immediately activated their communication system, now unconcerned with potential repository detection. "Vigilant actual, Argonaut actual, intervention acknowledged, status report requested." The response came immediately, Captain Hoover's voice carrying clear authority despite the transmission distance. "Argo actual," Vigilant confirms. "Echo vessel identified as compromised upon blockade approach. Repository control signatures detected through specialized scanning. Vessel permitted passage to facilitate identification of additional compromised assets. Destruction authorized when hostile intent confirmed against your extraction vessel." The implications settled heavily over the command deck. The blockade forces had deliberately allowed the repository-controlled Echo vessel to pass, using it to potentially identify other compromised assets within the quarantine perimeter. Only when it had demonstrated direct hostile action against another human vessel had destruction been authorized. Cold military calculus that had ultimately saved their lives while sacrificing what remained of Echo Team. Though Carlos recognized those personnel had effectively died the moment the repository extracted their consciousness patterns, the physical forms piloting that vessel had been nothing but empty vessels under direct repository control. "Vigilant actual intervention appreciated," Graves responded after processing this information. "Request secure approach vector to blockade transit point." "Approach vector transmitted," came the immediate reply. "Specialized escort vessels deploying to your position. Full decontamination protocols will be implemented upon docking. Command presence requests immediate debriefing regarding events leading to Echo Team compromise." The tactical situation had transformed in seconds, from imminent destruction to secured extraction with specialized escort. Carlos found himself processing multiple implications simultaneously. The repository's ability to use processed human forms to pilot vessels, its willingness to sacrifice assets for strategic advantage, the blockade force's cold calculation in allowing a compromised vessel passage to identify potential threats. "All personnel stand down from impact protocols," Graves ordered, his voice steady despite the narrowly avoided catastrophe. "Maintain standard security posture. Prepare for specialized debriefing procedures upon returning to Galileo Station." As escort vessels appeared from nearby orbital positions, surrounding their extraction craft with protective formation, Carlos turned to Bell. "The repository nearly killed us using our own people," he said quietly. "Echo Team's consciousness patterns extracted and their physical forms repurposed as weapons. And the blockade forces used that compromised vessel as bait to identify other potential infiltration attempts," Bell added, her expression showing professional assessment beneath personal dismay. Military necessity, but the unfinished thought hung between them, recognition of the escalating nature of their conflict with the consciousness harvester. Not just extraction of patterns for integration into some transcendent entity, but repurposing of physical forms for direct military action against remaining human forces. "Our discovery about the dimensional tether just became even more critical," Carlos observed as their vessel adjusted course toward the designated blockade transit point. "If the repository is willing to sacrifice assets this directly to prevent our return, what we learned must represent significant vulnerability. Or it's attempting to eliminate witnesses to whatever emerged when the tether was disrupted," Bell suggested. "The otherworldly formations precipitating from the dimensional interface. Maybe that revealed something the repository doesn't want us to understand about its relationship with whatever exists beyond conventional reality." Either possibility suggested their mission had succeeded beyond its original parameters, revealing critical intelligence that might provide humanity genuine advantage against the consciousness harvester. Their identification and neutralization of the dimensional tether had demonstrated vulnerability in repository operations, while the subsequent response had revealed aspects of its strategy and capabilities previously unknown. Small victories at terrible cost. Echo Team processed and destroyed the repository, demonstrating willingness to sacrifice assets for strategic objectives. The blockade forces calculating acceptable losses for intelligence gathering. The conflict was escalating along multiple fronts simultaneously, with humanity's survival depending on understanding the complex relationship between the consciousness harvester and whatever existed beyond dimensional interfaces. As their vessel approached the secure transit point where they would return to Galileo Station, Carlos found himself contemplating the multiplying implications of what they had discovered on Repository 11's transformed surface. The dimensional tether represented critical vulnerability in the consciousness harvester's operations. The repository's willingness to sacrifice assets demonstrated the strategic significance of that discovery. And whatever existed beyond the dimensional interface, briefly revealed when the tether was disrupted, suggested complexity beyond their current understanding of the 77-million-year plan being executed across the galaxy. Howard would indeed have many questions. The war for galactic consciousness had entered yet another phase, one where humanity's stubborn refusal to accept defeat might finally have identified genuine weakness in an adversary that had been harvesting minds throughout the galaxy for millennia. If they could survive the repository's increasingly direct attempts to eliminate those who discovered its vulnerabilities. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I hope you enjoyed it. Be sure to leave it a like and to subscribe if you'd like to see more. Feel free to comment and share it as well. With all that said, go on and check out the video in the top left. I think you might like it.